Hello friends, you are welcome to this class. We want to look at the factor price equalization theory. Factor equalization theory is another important theorem in international economics. It is drawn from our last discussion on the issue of factor endowments. Okay, and so it has a lot to do with factor endowment. Countries differ in relative to factor endowment, the factor a particular country has. I remember where we stopped in our lecture 2 that factor endowment theory brought in the place of capital as well as labor. Okay, so there are two key definitions here you need to note. We have the physical definition and the price definition. The physical definition talks about the factor itself, whereas the price definition talks about the price of the factor. So in physical definition, country 1 is considered to be capital intensive, that is labor scarce, if its proportion capital over labor is greater than country two's capital in endowment. That's country two is labor intensive in this case, and the same thing is applicable to price. Now R stands for the price of capital, whereas W stands for the price of labor. Okay, so if the proportion of of price of labor over price of wage is smaller, than that of country 2, then country A is considered to be capital abundant, whereas country 2 is considered to be labor abundant. Please don't mix up the sign of greater for the physical and less than for the price definition. Given the assumption of perfect competition and identical technology and preferences, the physical and the price definition are often identical. So if you use any of the approaches, you'll get the same results. Now, this is a pictorial illustration of what we are saying. You see, in this particular case, the country here has is labor endowed, and the capital they are using is quite small. They are looking at the holes here. Okay, whereas in this particular case you have a tractor, okay, caterpillar ready to work in the field, and it could be managed by one person and could do a lot, and so they are more capital intensive than the previous one. Now, if you remember the theory of microeconomies, isoquants, and you consider this graph, it is kind of the country that has the isoquant for x here is considered to be capital intensive than the country with isoquant for y here, which is considered to be labor intensive, and that is what all of this grammar is trying to explain. Now, it is important you note this question: is trade beneficial in factor proportion theory? Now, we have seen that trade benefits some and hurts some. The question here is not all about whether it's beneficial or not, but the question is, on the whole, given that this country are together, we're looking at two countries forming the whole world. So given that they are together, the gain of one country, does it outweigh the loss of the second country? So to answer that question, you apply the issue of welfare, and it's very subjective, and that typically is outside the scope of economics analysis. However, we ask the question: if these two countries enter into international trade and country A gains whereas country B loses, the question is this: does the gain of country A, if they were to pay country B for their losses, will they be able to offset that losses and still be better off? If the answer is yes, then trading between the two countries becomes very possible. Okay, so trade expands economic choices of different nations. Otherwise, the country will be consuming only what they have produced. But by the time you allow international trade, people are able to import things they don't produce. Hence, the principle that is possible to redistribute wealth is obtainable. Okay, the presence of loser and winners in the real world is probably the most important reason for trade not to be free. And that is why you see sometimes people try to put some policy, some strategies to control their border. Okay, now, and that choice is what we try to treat around the production possibility frontier, or what is also called production possibility curve. And what is it all about? It is a curve that shows the maximum possible combination of goods or services that an economy can produce when all resources are fully and efficiently employed. That's your production possibility frontier. And this is a typical illustration here. This country can either produce gin or produce shirts. So if they decide to invest all their fund in producing gin, they will produce 1,000 and then zero shirts. If they decide to invest all their fund in producing shade, they produce 1,250 and zero gene. So their ability to combine the proportion of what to produce here tells a lot about their production possibility frontier. Okay, now factor price equalization theory. Okay, if you had followed our previous discussion, tries to answer the following question, very important. It tries to address the question if the relative price of labor-intensive goods changes. Now, you have labor-intensive goods. Let's call it cocoa. Okay, if the relative price of cocoa changes, how will that relative price of cocoa change change in a labor abundant country? Okay, change in a labor abundant country which produces this product in question. If the relative price of capital intensive, let's say a country that is producing, call it laptop, if the relative price of the country of capital changes, how will it affect the price of capital change in the capital intensive country? So it is dealing with the domestic economy. If the price changes, you are not just looking at the international economy, how does it affect the domestic economy? Okay, in reality, most of the assumptions needed for price equalization do not hold. For instance, there is this assumption that there is differences. The technology is the same, productivity is the same, but it is not true. And there's the assumption that transportation cost is not considered. It is considered in reality. That tariff is not there, but many of the countries they bring in tariff, and then subsidy is not there, but some countries we know also bring subsidy, and then there is perfect competition, but indeed we know that there is no perfect competition. So because these assumptions on which price equalization theorem is built are hardly attainable, as a result, okay, we hardly observe price equalization among the countries that are competing. And that is why effort had been made to suggest other theories to explain international trade. And that is where we want to quickly look at three major theorems in this category. There are many others, but the product life cycle theory, the country similarity theory, and then the theory of economies of scale. Okay, the product life cycle theory clearly states that products have 5 stages. There is a time of appearing, that's introduction, and then there is a time of these products growing in the market. There is a time of maturity when there is perfection in the model, in the strategies used in production. There is a time of saturation when the innovative nation competition begins to decline, and other countries that were not the original inventors have started inventing and producing such products and bringing them to the market. And then there is the fifth stage, which is decline. Okay, um, the stage of decline. Uh, I don't know. Somebody want to call it the clay here. So it's the stage of decline. And so the products begin to go obsolete. The sales and the profits fall. Now, the other theory is country similarity theory. This was developed by the Swedish economists in 1961, and the approach was found based on following principles. Number one, that the condition of production depends on the condition of demand. Two, efficiency of production is as high as demand. In reality, it's hardly attainable, but these are conditions for the model proposed, by Linda. Now, the condition of domestic production depends mainly on the domestic demand. It is the domestic representative demand that form the basis for production, not just the condition for export. Okay, now the foreign market is just a continuation of the internal market. That's the assumption, that the foreign market is just an extension of the domestic market. So the international exchange is only a continuation of what happens within the economy. These are assumptions used by in country similarity theory. And then the third theory, which is where we're going to end for today for this class, is the theory of economies of scale. Now, as the factor of production grows, the cost per capita reduces as a result of three key things. One, specialization in production. Two, the relative slow growth in auxiliary departments than in the scale of production. And then the third one is technology advancement. So these are things that could cause the economy to form large production. And then as there is large production on a large scale, the unit cost of each product begins to drop. And that is what happens in theory of economies of scale. Thank you very much for joining us, and wish you the very best. Cheers.